Good morning. I'm Stephen Leake. I'm an elder at First Presbyterian Church of Mesquite, Texas, and I'm also one of the teachers of the Discipleship Sunday School class there. Today we continue with our study of the Gospel of John, and I'd like to remind you that our curriculum is based upon the Daily Bible Study Series by Professor William Barclay, and that we're using the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible for our scripture readings. Now, today we're going to talk about the arrest of Jesus and the fact that he was brought before the former high priest, Annas, before he was questioned and tried by the current high priest, Caiaphas. Now, the Synoptic Gospels tell us that the reason that Jesus was arrested was because he upset the money changers and the sellers of the victims in the temple. But the Gospel of John says that happened on Jesus' first visit to Jerusalem, and that on Jesus' third visit to Jerusalem, remember, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and that's the reason that Jesus was arrested. So with that in mind, let's take up our lesson today. We're going to have two different scripture readings, but we're going to read them together so that we can combine the arrest and the trial in front of Annas. So we're going to read John 18, 12 through 14, and verses 19 through 24. So the soldiers, their officer, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. First, they took him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people. Then the the former high priest, Annas, questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. So Jesus answered, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said." When he had said this, one of the police standing near struck Jesus on the face, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. For the sake of keeping the narrative continuous, we'll take together the two passages which deal with the trial before Annas, and we'll do the same with the two passages which deal with the tragedy of Peter. Only John tells us that Jesus was brought first to Annas. Annas was a notorious character. No figure is better known in contemporary Jewish history than Annas. And no person was deemed more fortunate or successful, but none more generally loathed than this former high priest. Annas was the power behind the throne in Jerusalem. He had been high priest from AD 6 to AD 15, and 4 of his sons had held the high priesthood, and Caiaphas was his son-in-law. That fact itself is suggestive and illuminating. There had been a time when the Jews were free, when the high priest held office for life. But when the Roman governors came, the office became a place of contention, intrigue, bribery, and corruption. It now went to the greatest minion and the highest bidder, to the man who was willing to toe the line with the Roman governor. The high priest was the arch collaborator, the man who bought comfort, ease, prestige, and power with close cooperation with the Romans. The family of Annas was immensely wealthy, and one by one they had intrigued and bribed their way into office, while Annas was the power behind it all. The way in which Annas made his money was disgraceful. In the court of the Gentiles, there were sellers of victims for the sacrifices, those sellers whom Jesus had driven out. They were not traders, they were extortioners. Every victim offered in the temple had to be without spot and blemish. There were inspectors to see that it was so. If a victim was bought outside the temple, it was certain that a flaw would be found with it. The worshiper was then directed to buy at the temple booths where the victims had already been examined and where there was no risk of rejection. That would have been convenient and helpful except for one thing. Inside the temples, a pair of doves could cost as much as 15 times what could have been paid if bought outside. The whole business was sheer exploitation, and the shops where the temple victims were sold were called the bazaars of Annas. They were the property of the family of Annas. It was by the exploitation of the worshipers, by trading on the sacred sacrifices, that Annas had amassed a fortune. The Jews themselves hated the household of Annas. There's a passage in the Talmud which says, "Woe to the house of Annas! They are high priests. Their sons are keepers of the treasury. Their sons-in-law are guardians of the temple, and their servants beat the people with staves." Annas and his household were notorious. Now we can see why Annas arranged that Jesus should be brought to him first. Jesus was the man who had attracted Annas' vested interest. He had cleared the temple of the sellers of the victims and had hit Annas where it hurt, in his pocketbook. Annas wanted to be the first to gloat over the capture of this disturbing Galilean. The examination before Annas was a mockery of justice. Jewish law held that a prisoner must not be questioned in a way which would incriminate him. And it states, "Our law does not inflict the penalty of death upon a sinner by his own confession." Annas violated the principles of Jewish justice when he questioned Jesus, and Jesus reminded him of this. Jesus said, "Don't ask me questions, ask him who has heard me." He was, in effect, saying, take your evidence about me in the proper and legal way. Examine your witnesses, which you have every right to do, and stop examining me, which you have no right to do. When Jesus spoke, one of the officers slapped him across the face. The officer said, in effect, "Are you trying to teach the high priest how to conduct a trial?" Jesus' answer was, "If I have said or taught anything illegal, witnesses should be called. I have only stated the law. Why hit me for that?" Jesus never had any hope of justice. The self-interest of Annas and his colleagues had been exposed, and Jesus was condemned even before he was tried. When people are engaged in evil, their only desire is to eliminate anyone who opposes them. Thank you for joining me again this morning. God bless each and every one of you.